Hey, Sean's here, and this will be my solution to the RHCSA lab practice, task 6. So a couple things. I want to do one extra thing configuration-wise before we go ahead and dive into the actual 6th task, just because I think it makes things a little bit easier, and it'll also show you something that I'm not sure if the lab goes over it, but something useful to learn. So you should have already configured this from our initial setup, although I don't think I finished part 2 of the lab setup yet, but if you haven't, we'll go ahead and go over it really quickly. So you just want to make sure that the repo server is set to a static address and it's on the same subnet, because by default it's probably not. So if you remember, it's just conmod, and I already set the wired connection 1 to ENP0S8, so you would have to do that, or if you use wired connection 1, you just set the IPv4 adder to 192.168.55. You can choose anything for this. We're just going to use 47, obviously a 24, and you would want to use a 192.168.55.1 for the gateway, and IPv4 method manual for that. And that's really all you need to do. You don't really need to do the IPv6 configuration. That's fine. I think the one thing I forgot here, we'll do .dns, and we'll just use this. So we'll go ahead and do that. So also, you would want to make sure that you change the host name as well. I used RHCSA Repo. Obviously, if you forgot, you just pass a host name after host name like that, and then you would exit and log back in, and it will change it to the host name that you just passed. So with that done, in theory, now you should be able to ping the host name, because we can ping the IP address. So we get an echo reply pinging that. But you'll notice that if I have it already set up, but if you did say like pop boot, it'll say this for you, because the name or service is not known, because your machine doesn't actually have the IP hostname binding for the server that you're trying to ping. So where you can actually edit that directly is you do vi etc host, and this will have all of the manual IP bindings that you can set. So very easily you can just add, say, RHCSA repo, then you can add the second server, so that you can also use server 2 instead of the IP. And then I added server 1's IP address, because now that this is done, let's go ahead and quit that. You can just SCP the SE host file over to root at RHCSA server 2, and then just put it there, enter the password, and that'll go ahead and replace the etc file on there. So you'll see now, and remember, we didn't touch this at all yet. If we ping CSA repo, we'll get echo replies from there. So we can actually use this now, and doing that just saves us the trouble of having to memorize the IP address, which is kind of unwieldy. And we can also do things like pass in the host name for other commands. Like we could do, like, say, general host name xargs echo this is, and you'll see, like, we can use that way, like we can use the host name instead for other things. The host name for the RHCSA repo, we can include that in scripts and stuff, and use that instead of the IP address again, which is very nice to make it like an environment variable or something like that. So I just wanted to show that before we actually moved on to the task. That way you can obviously do that if you wanted to, but again, not necessary and not relevant to the task, and not sure if we'll see that later on in the lab task, but just wanted to point that out, that you can do that there. Okay, now that that's done, we will move on to the actual task, which is just configuring the repo file on both of these servers to point to the repo server repo that's being hosted over HTTP with Apache. So if you remember all the way back, we had to edit that config file, or rather the repo file, in the yum.repos directory. And you can see that at yum.repos.d/. You'll notice that, of course, on this server and on server 2, we don't have that in, because we, of course, never made that on these servers. So what we can do, just to save ourselves some typing, And this is the really lazy way of doing it. Let's go over here to this. I of course already been on this, so you would of course have to hit yes. But what we can do is also, well, I'll have to add this to save myself some time as well. You want it to 1, and what's it called? RHCSA server 1. We'll do that right quick. So SCP the etc yum.repos.d Red Hat Repofile over to root at RHCSA server 1. And we will of course put that in the same spot, etc yum.repos right there. This is the first time we are connecting to server 1 from Repo. And there we go. You can see that we copied it over. So go ahead and exit that connection now. So we're back on server 1. So you'll see if we go over to yum.repos.d, Red Hat repo is there, and it also has the full config, but of course this is not entirely correct. We do need to do some editing to this. So we will go to Red Hat repo. Okay, so now your configuration should look exactly like this. So now we can actually do a DNS search as if pretty much, you know, we were searching previously. You'll see that this actually does return, like say HTTPD. I have some process running, so we will go ahead and kill that. Which again. And then yeah, you see that it will actually fully return everything that we need. So we'll go ahead and clear that. So that means everything is fully configured on server 1. So we can just go ahead and transfer it over to server 2 now. Pretty much the same way as I showed earlier. Go ahead etc yum.repos.d/Red Hat repo, and we'll go ahead and root RHCSA server 2. And we are putting it in the same directory. So yum.repos.d, and then we don't need to specify the file. We'll go ahead and do that. Wrong password. And you'll see that it successfully did that. So we can go ahead and choose server 2 now. And over here, we will do a DNS search, HTTP. Let's choose the repo as appstream. And you'll see that it pulls it up exactly as server 1 did. So yeah, that's everything for this task, and we will move on to the next one. Thanks.